Nihilism means the self-depreciation of the highest values. Without goals, without answers to why, all newly formed relationships are achieved before they are fixed. All solid things disappear into thin air, and all scarce things are profaned. People finally have to calmly face the real situation of their lives and their mutual relationships. Hello everyone. No matter which videos you watched, there are already countless videos about nihilism. The more common ones will talk about Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Camus. The more expanded ones will talk about Kierkegaard, Heidegger, and Sartre. But we will not talk all about these today. We will cut into the pathological core of nihilism in a way of the past and give a new answer to how to resist nihilism that you have never heard of. So for nihilism, we must first grasp it as a historical issue. That is, we must analyze the historical structure that produced nihilism. On this basis, the real overcoming of nihilism must mean overcoming the historical structure that produced nihilism. And it cannot be. It is a change in personal mentality. Unfortunately, it is difficult to see the introduction of a historical perspective in other video editors. Secondly, we must also understand nihilism as a problem of subjectivity. That is, we cannot be satisfied with the understanding of personal, psychological fragments and changes in mentality, but we must govern human life at a holistic level. This is subjective nihilism. In plain words, I can't find the reason, meaning, and purpose of life. In philosophical terms, the subject has lost the ability to organize his own life and mobilize his own spirit. Therefore, how the contradictions in historical structure manifest themselves as a crisis of subjectivity in individuals, and whether there is a new philosophical attitude towards life that can help us resist this crisis, and whether it is even possible to mobilize the subject and in turn promote the self-harming of the historical structure, is the answer to nihilism in this video. Next, let the game begin. In 1862, nihilism had no one who had followed Turgenev's Little. The publication of the novel Father and Son became popular in Russia. At the beginning of the novel, the protagonist Bazarov confessed that nihilists are people who do not submit to any authority and do not believe in any principles, no matter how scarce the principle is. Negation is the most useful principle at all. And when we negate anything, what we have to do now is not to build but to clear the foundation. Pure negation and destruction have been proposed as a historical tax. With the popularity of novels, the term nihilism became to associate with indiscriminate violence activities against existing order. Political nihilism is the first child of nihilism in modern history. If we want to seriously discuss the historicity of nihilism, we cannot regard nihilism as a spiritual plague that fell from the sky, but understand it as a logical result of enlightenment and modernity, representing essential dilemma and self-negation of the modern world. Of course, this modern world cannot be simply regarded as the result of a natural shift of the timeline to a certain era, but it should be clearly defined as modern bull society. So we can understand what Nietzsche meant by nihilism, which means the self-touch of the highest level. Nihilism represents that the modern world created by enlightenment has fundamental flaws, and it is now unsustainable. And the principles that support modern world are heading towards self-denial. Self-denial means that it is not something external that has defeated it, but it has discovered that it must be modernized by itself. For example, if you read Marx's original work and find that you cannot understand it at all, then you find that you need to have a more comprehensive grasp of German classical philosophy. This is self-denial. Negation is the fundamental driving force for history to move to the next stage. Back to the topic. The issue we're discussing now is why nihilism is the logical result of enlightenment and modernity. and why this logical result is manifested. The major issue of this time is that old society, from ancient times to the present, is a universal problem that cannot provide the meaning of life. It's just that the ancients either did not have enough subjectivity to raise this issue, or they still had religion, tradition, ethics, and philosophy. Although it was pre-reflected philosophy to alleviate this problem, everything changed after the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment gave reason almost unlimited power and required that everything be placed in the court of reason to prove its legitimacy. Otherwise, there would be no place for it in the modern society. As a result, all sub-reflective spiritual placebos collapsed. We will soon see that the end of this disintegration movement is the self-disintegration of enlightenment. The premise of the achievements of modern industrial civilization is to cut off the moral beliefs and lifestyles of pre-modern traditions. Marx wrote, "Boo, where he has gained rules, all federal, patriarchal, and idealistic relationships have been destroyed. He ruthlessly cut off all kinds of feudal fetters that bound people to their natural superiors. He left no other connections between people except naked interest code and ruthless cash transitions. He drowned the scarce outbursts of religious piety, discriminatory enthusiasm, and petty bourgeois sentimentality in the icy water of selfish calculations. He turned human dignity into exchange values and replaced countless chartered and self-reliant freedoms with the consciousness of freedom of trade. The collapse of traditional society created a value vacuum, and nihilism grew and spread in such a vacuum. Enlightenment and modernity overthrew traditional society like a rotten wood. But looking back, they found that their foundation was also built on quicksand. What is the logical premise of enlightenment? It is the imagination of a certain kind of human nature, the infinite power of reason, the infinite step-by-step progress of history, and so on. Therefore, enlightenment can imagine that an established historical framework can be continuously applied, and development itself can solve all the problems brought about by development. And hope is on the horizon. However, all of these have been proven by history to be pure illusions. Modernity simply replaced the authority of religion with reason and shifted from the worship of divinity to the worship of reason. So you will see that a direct rebellion against modernity is carried out in an irrational form, such as Lod's machine destroying movements, Schopenhauer and Nietzsche's philosophy of will, and the avant-garde art that advocates physical exercise and dizziness. In fact, the criticisms of Enlightenment modernity appeared almost at the same time as Enlightenment itself. Rousseau himself is a very interesting example. He is not only a representative of the Enlightenment, but also a pioneer of Romanticism, advocating a return to pre-modern nature. After hundreds of years of rational and blind building, the problems of enlightenment are exposed, compared with extreme destructive power. What kind of future the Enlightenment provide us? He said that each of us should live a reasonable and therefore most worthwhile life, but in the end, reason destroyed itself. The play of the poet is still being performed. The freedom, justice, and equality promised turned out to be only abstract freedom without content, represented by the so-called white lefties we see today. They have lost everything, but they are free. We are finally going to ask the fundamental question. After removing all the illusions of Enlightenment modernity, what kind of world is it building? What are the principles to support it? After double criticism from philosophy and political economy, Marx gave his own judgment on modernity. The modern world opened by Enlightenment is essentially a marriage between capital and rational metaphysics. The outstanding representatives of rational evil physics is modern imperial science, and its most proud strength is abstraction, formalization, rationalization, and quantitative control. under the conspiracy with capital as the material force. Science, as a knowledge element, has been transformed into an unprecedentedly huge productivity. And through science and technology, education, culture, and information, it has established an ideological world and a vast ocean of modern rules. This is the source of power of modernity, the voice of its dilemma, and the sum of history of nihilism that we want to reveal today. Now, we can even ask the question that has not been mentioned at all. Where does universal validity and logical necessity of modern imperial science come from? It comes from the fetishism nature of the capital. The nature of this fetishism is no means as simple as community worship. It's an abstract logical space full of distortion and illusion that permeates and even permeates our own lives. However, this is not the theme of this video. As for whether we will do a specific topic on external fetishism, it depends on your likes and comments. We have already answered the question of why nihilism is the historical structure. The next question is how it manifests itself as a crisis of subjectivity. In my opinion, the crisis of subjectivity is even the most important issue in modern philosophy, including some people who say the entire history of post-war movement is a history of searching for the subject of movement, of failing to find it. If the subject is gone, what is the subject? The subject is a person who can mobilize his own life, a person who can take his own world, a person who walks upright in history, and a person who stands up and says no. But now the subject is gone. The subject is dissolved in Taylor's assembly line, dissipate in cubicles of the city of science, disintegrated under the analytical quantification of modern science as a rational metaphysics, and collapsed in an almost despiritualized world. The whole world seems to be a self-circulating large machine system without a subject. It needs to be added to the abstract expansion of subjectivity and its internal loss for the same thing. For example, there are groups of people with excessive self-consciousness on the internet. If you ask them to take on something, they will immediately feel like they can't do it. There is a metaphor of an iron house, saying that there is an iron house with no windows and it's difficult to destroy. Many people are sleeping inside and they will suffocate to death when the time comes. Subjectivity is that no one stands up at all and no one even thinks of getting up to break out of this iron house. Everyone is in an iron pot and it's getting hot. If it is not a self-explosion, the next session will turn from the analysis of historical structure to the analysis of personal life experience to examine the direct cause of the individual's nihilism. I can even announce the answer now. In a world, those things that should have affirmed the meaning of my life have been turned against me and become the pressure to deny my life. In 2 words, it is an alienation. Generally speaking, the theoretical starting point of classical political economics is labor. According to the labor theory of value, the products of labor should be, of course, all belong to the laborers. However, compared with reality, this is not to say that it is exactly the same, but at least can be said to be completely opposite. Political economics have fallen into the theory fallacy, and Marx's criticism starts from here. He pointed out the essence of problem lies in the theoretical starting point of political economics. This labor is not ordinary or nature, but self-contradictory labor, which is alienated labor. Next, let's push the 4 levels of alienation theory. First of all, I hope everyone still remembers the sensibility and objectivity mentioned in previous videos. Human existence is, first of all, an objective existence. People must realize their lives in the relationship network of countless objects such as tables, chairs, meals, and other people. Human practice is nothing more than the objectification and externalization of human essential power. For example, doing handicrafts, assembling models, cooking a good dish, and writing good poem are human essential powers. It is drawn out and becomes the object of your creation. In this object activity, your essential power, it has been confirmed provided that this labor is autonomous, free and conscious. You only need to recall how happy you were when you were playing with building blocks, when you were a child to understand. Then the first level of alienation theory is the alienation between workers and labor products. The product I worked hard to make, the externalization of my essential power does not belong to me. So the more I do, the more I'm hollowed out. The laborer has lost its object. First, he lacks the object and means of living to sustain his life. Second, he does not have the means of labor to continue his production activities independently. Therefore, he must sell himself to those who have both. This is the street land class. The laborer sells his labor power, and the result is that the crystallization of his essential power becomes a power that does not belong to him. The harder he works, the lower the proportion of social wealth he occupies. You ate one more steamed bun than yesterday, and the boss has already changed to a Ferrari. This is the first level of alienation theory. The second level is the alienation of laborer and the labor activity itself. Since laborer is forced to sell himself to the street land people, what he is engaged in is a kind of labor that has nothing to do with nature, freedom, autonomy, and consciousness. This kind of labor is in direct negation of the essential power and subjectivity of man. It is not the free play of his own intelligence and physical strength, but a double torture of the body and mind. In addition, logically speaking, alienation of the labor product must first mean that the labor activity itself has been alienated first. Because the labor product is nothing more than the summary and crystallization of labor activity. So you begin to love the seer and hate work, and live a lazy life. Once the force of life stops, no one will be willing to work. For example, the great god of Sanhi would run away as soon as he got a little money. The third level of alienation theory is the alienation of human nature from human nature, which means that you feel that being a human is painful, and I am sorry for being born as a human. Human existence is a holistic, universal existence and human existence, and people know that their existence is a species existence. This is the essential difference between people and animals. People consciously deal with others in nature, produce their own lives in labor, obtain their own social relations, and thus confirm that their essence is a species essence. That is, they know that I am a human being and I am me. Alienated labor is the ultimate distortion of all this. You cannot confirm your essential power in labor, and naturally you cannot find who I am. And just because you are a human being, you have an internal existence, so you can lower yourself to a level lower than that of animals and engage in such alienated labor. We know that in most cases in history, and even in reality, the situation of workers can indeed compete with that of animals, which constitutes complete alienation. That is free will, which lowers oneself, denies oneself as a human being, denies one's own species essence, and turns the life that confirms one's existence as a human being into a means of maintaining physical existence. At this point, people start to envy the life of animals. After experiencing a series of major blows, the protagonist of Chainsaw Man, Electric Spur, confessed to Miss Makia that he no longer wanted to bear the pressure of thinking and judging, and his wishes was to be a dog. Every modern person has a battery in his life. The fourth level is the alienation between people. We know that all production is reproduction, which not only produces material products, but also produces production relations that maintain production. Alienated labor continuously produces the power. Alienated labor. The harder you work, the stronger the power that dominates you, and the harder it is for you to escape from this network of alienated relationships. Since in the third level of regulations, the human species essence has been alienated, people can't find who they are, then of course people can't find who others are, and dealing with relationships between people will be more difficult than dealing with the relationships between people and themselves. And the degree of alienation will be deeper. Many people will exhaust their energy just by dealing with people. Social fear, trust crisis, and extreme indifference between people. If they don't become enemies directly after these 4 levels, all things that can affirm the meaning of my existence from my works, my creative activities, my subjective life, and the affirmation of others to me have all disintegrated. They have all reorganized and become the root of my negation. In such a life, all the remaining values cannot find a basis for affirmation. There seems to be only 2 ways to find a sense of existence. The first is to return to the absurd, to pure negativity, including many people on the internet today who rely on a little cheap negativity to retain a sense of existence. The second is to indulge in lust, to return to pure animality and physical sensory stimulation. The representative of these 2 is the familiar old man Reek. Under the revelation of Marx, political economy and the entire modern world are found to be built on an inverted starting point and alienated buildings. The entire modern historical structure built on this starting point is naturally inverted. This is the fundamental tension of his self-negation. Therefore, such a modern world can never be the end of history. The next link of history must be, it is to turn this inverted world upside down again. This is the real overcoming of the historical roots of nihilism. In fact, alienation theory is facing a very serious challenge, which is related to the fundamentals of the theory. That is, does alienation presuppose the labor state itself, and then say that it is alienated? There are generally 2 answers to this question. The first is affirmative, believing that alienation is a brightly presupposed theory and a manifestation of the immaturity of Marxist thought. If this judgment continues to develop, Marx will be divided into early Marx and late Marx, and even divided into early, middle, and late, 3 parts. Of course, I personally do not agree with it at all, because it is dangerous to destroy the consistency of Marxist thought. The second answer is negative. This authentic labor state is not presupposed, but phenomenologically restored due to the space limitations. I can only briefly explain this. That is, when you face this alienated labor, you suspend all the alienated parts and see how the labor itself appears to you after the alienation is removed. This is the authentic labor that has not been reserved. If you think that Marx already has the spirit of phenomenology, then not only can it be read in the text, but many things can be explained at once. If you have paid attention to the references in the introduction, you probably know that the topic of the next section is Husserl's phenomenology. When people talk about nihilism, they like to talk about existentialism, right? They talk about Heidegger, Geer, and Sartre. But few people mention that they are all students of Hegel. And phenomenology is the theory, premise, and internal support of existentialism. Take me as an example. I learned the basic ideas of existentialism very early, but it took me several years to learn phenomenology. In the past few years, existentialism without phenomenology was very fragile and useless. It was easy to be beaten back to its original form. Therefore, existentialism must be supported by phenomenology, otherwise it is just a boring and theoretical theory. Let me say this first, and I will do my best to present you with an overall picture of Husserl's phenomenology. Try to connect all the key points together and lower the threshold for understanding. But it is still a text. This is quite difficult to understand, so please don't worry. Later, I'll use games as examples and analogies. And then you will suddenly realize you have actually been using phenomenology for a long time. What is phenomenology? In Heidegger's words, phenomenology is how things appear to us and how we face them. To understand it easily, it means to put aside fantasy and seek truth from facts. Don't underestimate this sentence. Modern people's minds are full of fantasy. They don't see anything, but they like to imagine what it is behind things, which leads to the inability to make effective judgments and actions in the ocean of fantasy. Phenomenology is not just a search method, it is also a life attitude. We will talk about this later. For me, the purpose of establishing a new science, such as phenomenology, is to clarify the relationship between me and the world, so as to save the precarious subjectivity of modern people. In order to clarify the relationships between me and the world, phenomenology focuses on the intermediate link between me and the world. It can be said that phenomenology is a science about how I appear to the world and how the world appears to me. This also leads to another task of phenomenology, which is to find a universal basis for human scientific knowledge. We have already explained the background of modernality. In the era where philosophy is gradually decaying in natural science, as a modern metaphysics that has no reflection on its own foundation, dominates everything under the gaze of positivism, physicalism, and objectivism. There is no subject, even no human being. Human beings become a polymer of meat or even a polymer of atoms. Human life becomes mechanical movements, human thoughts become the interaction of brain electrical signals. Human life and thoughts are originally an absolute event. Now, you disassemble it into a relative knowledge network and then claim that this knowledge network is everything. This is completely unacceptable to Husserl, so what he has to do is to define the dignity of human beings as rational subjects, find the master. The subject once again takes on the possibility of the world and life, and then reconstructs a public life between rational subjects. Today we mainly grasp the most fundamental concept of phenomenology, which is the transcendental reduction to see how the subject is achieved. It should be noted that the following is only Husserl selected and described by me. This is not only because Husserl himself is an unfinished story, but also because I disagree with many things in his theory, such as the pure consciousness he cherished in his overly strong rationalist stance. What I care about is what things in Husserl still shine for ordinary people like us today. Before entering the vivid restoration, it is necessary for us to sort out the relationship between Husserl and classical philosophy. As a philosopher at the intersection of classical and modern times, Husserl's classification lies in the fact that he still adheres to the position of rational subject from Plato to Descartes to Kant, and then to his own, while his modernality lies in the fact that he has turned from a transcendental point to an internal position, no longer above life or even stopping life to think about philosophy, but instead internalizing his own philosophy in life. We know that classical philosophy, especially Platonism, looks down on the world of life and despises common sense, believing that it is very low level and unreliable things, and that we have to go to the supersensory world or even to heaven to find the truth. But Nietzsche has declared the failure of this philosophy. The actual meaning of God's death is that the supersensory world has collapsed, and we actually only have our own lives. Therefore, Husserl's position on the inner and life is a break with classical philosophy that always wants to transcend life, and it is a resolute restart. Then the fundamental method of phenomenological method of vivid reduction is reduced to the imperial self of natural life in the world, to the transcendental self. It is obviously necessary for us to explain what vivid is, which is also related to Husserl's internality. When talking about vividness, we must talk about Kant. In Kant, vividness refers to something that is inherent to the subject and lays the foundation for the subject's imperial knowledge. For example, when Kant dug into the subject to the deepest level, he dug up time and space. That is, they were laying the foundation for all knowledge. If you think it is too complicated, You don't need to go into it. In short, the attribute of vividness is not hanging in the sky. The divine law on earth is precisely the most fundamental thing that is inherent in subjectivity. Classical philosophy constructed a set of theories that transcend life with a starting point that transcends life, which itself implies the negation of life. Kant and Fricke's critical philosophy was considered by contemporary philosopher Jacobi to lead to nihilism. For them, it is too difficult to prove that there is a world outside the subject, or there is no way to prove that there are no stubborn. There is an abyss between the subject and the internal world. If this cannot be proved, then everything is meaningless, and nihilism will occur in minutes. To be honest, I didn't have any ideas at first. However, when it comes to the history of philosophy, the first philosophical problem that was seriously considered was the timelessness of the external world and the objective validity of human subjective cognition. This is the problem faced by Kant. Of course, they couldn't figure it out no matter what, because the question was asked in the wrong way. Husserl's starting point is precisely the pre-reflective natural attitude that previous philosophers despised very much. That is, the attitude of people who had never conducted philosophical reflection at all towards the world in their daily lives. He believed that there were very valuable and strong things in the natural attitude. On the contrary, philosophers try to transcend life. No matter how much they doubt everything, still have to eat when they are hungry and sleep when they're tired. The fundamental position of the natural attitude is a series of beliefs. I believe that the world is still extending beyond the horizon. I believe that the world still exists when I fall asleep. And I believe the person who wakes up next day is still myself. There is no reason I am here and the world is really here. Doubting this matter is meaningless and has no basis. It is from here that Husserl began his vivid reduction. However, his belief in the existence of the world is not only a starting point, but also a constraint. People who adhere to the natural attitude are bound by this constraint and always try to exclude the subjectivity of experience as much as possible in order to obtain accurate knowledge of the fixed world with the help of objective experience. This process of objectification reaches its extreme in modern empirical science. The result is still the disappearance of the subject we have repeatedly mentioned. We have said that the vivid reduction is reduction from the worldly self to the vivid self, which contains the fundamental transformation of thinking mode and life attitude. That is, the transformation from me appearing to the world appearing to me. We have also said that the focus of phenomenology is the mutual manifestation of me and the world. My manifestation to the world is a way of life under the natural attitude. I am the subject of the world. The world is an infinite, huge, and self-operating system that never stops. It has countless eyes staring at you. Now you have to prove your value to it and win your position in the system. There is even a hierarchical ladder that requires you to climb up indefinitely. If you can't do it, sorry, then you are not qualified. There is no place for you in this system. You become a marginal person that no one cares about. To be honest, just giving a speech in front of 100 people will make your legs weak, let alone this. So this attitude can easily lead to the collapse of the subject. When we look back at the world, we find that a meaningful world is not just the blue sky and white clouds that are present, but there is always a me who perceives the color of the sky. There is always a me who makes a judgment that I think the sky is blue, and there is always a me who decides to protect such a blue sky. In me, the process of living towards the world. I perceive the world, judge the world, and accept my perception and execute my judgment based on those perceptions on a higher level. I take all these centralized judgments and actions in the world and enrich myself. This is subjectivity. I am not saying that the subject is superior to other existence in the world. especially since there are countless subjects sharing this world. For example, is the origin of the plane rectangular coordinate system necessarily more advanced than other points? I am afraid not, but there must be an origin to make such specific coordinate system possible. We now have the buds of subjectivity, and to achieve the transition from me appearing to the world appearing to me, we need a key step, which is suspensional wisdom. Suspend all the world that has not yet appeared to me. Suspending is not negation. It does not mean that the world I have not seen does not exist. Putting them all aside and not making judgments. How I relate to the world is how the world appears to me, and I do not make any judgments beyond this. This is a high degree of calmness and composure. Most of the famous generals who can withstand great pressure on the battlefield have this trait. The indefinitely huge, complex, and reductant world information itself is huge pressure. But I put them all aside without making any judgments, and focus on the parts that really mean me. Focus on the parts that my senses perceive, how the world appears to me. I move towards it, but I don't stop at the origin. As my eyes and footsteps move, more and more things mean me, and more information is received and confirmed by me. At the same time, the world that is effective to me is also expanding. The world is revealed to me step by step. Let me use my favorite game, Red Dead Redemption, as an example. This is the map at the beginning of the game. It is basically the fog of war. But this place where the players walk is just this little bit. For places in the fog, I imagine that there is nothing there, because it's entirely possible that the game has not been made at all, and there is nothing, so I don't make any judgments, unless I go to the place myself and reveal what it is. As the game progresses, my footsteps go farther and further, and the game will continuously to appear to me. When my footsteps have passed all the places, the complete world is fully revealed to me. So as a result of vivid restoration, we get a place that can bear an effective one. The vivid subject of the world, this vivid subject is inherent in the world and lays the foundation for the possible amazing world. There are as many worlds as there are eyes, and this world is his world. I emphasize again that vivid restoration is by no means to deny the external world, but to wing the world, to wing the meaningful subject, and to be able to create the world in which he lives upright. In the last example link, let's see how game players unconsciously use phenomenology and how players as game subjects make a game possible. First of all, in order to enter the game world, players must take a first step, which is suspension. Suspending the real world, headphones, songs. What happens outside has nothing to do with me. You will no longer think about the hellish requirements of the client, and you will no longer think about deadlines and quantitative indicators. You will suspend them all. In addition, there is other level of suspension, which is the game world you have not played yet. You may be full of expectations, but you don't think that the entire game content is directly in front of you. Instead, as you play, the game world is gradually revealed to you, recognized by you, and becomes part of your gaming experience. This is the game content that is meaningful to you. As for the part that is not revealed to you at all, what do you want to do? For example, when you play PUBG, there is no sign, but you always feel that someone is preparing a knife behind you. You have to look back after taking 2 steps. Can I still play? So I said that for the game world, the player itself is the vivid subject of phenomenology. It is he who takes on the game activities and makes the game world possible. Why? At least when playing games, I can stay away from nihilism and I can confirm my own life. Because no matter how timid you are in reality, you are a real subject in the game. To be honest, I didn't expect that I would introduce piston phenomenology in a relatively systematic way within the 20 minutes. And the comprehensive coverage and effective information density are actually more than that. I have consulted most of the papers thanks to my friend who have been silently urging me to update. In fact, I am not the person who gives answers, I am a storyteller. and I especially don't want people to think that I intend to provide a ready-made knowledge framework that can be used. If I must summarize my work, I'm just describing the links that thoughts must go through in order to move continuously towards the next link. If everyone can see that I have been moving forward in each of my main videos, that is enough. Please keep your thoughts moving. Thank you for watching and see you next time.